What do you think about women, Mr. Arthur?
I don't think there's much difference between women and men. Most of both are awful. But there's a few worth loving and dying for, I guess. If they'll let you.
Welcome back to episode 4 of Ride With Me, the queerness of Red Dead Redemption 2. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a boy. I had short hair. I loved boys' clothes, dinosaurs, cowboys. When I would play with the kids, I always chose to play male characters. And instead of admiring princesses and highly feminine cartoons, I emulated the boys. You'd think this would have made it clear to me, my perception of my gender, but it didn't. While it was true I wanted to be a boy, I also loved wearing dresses on occasion. My Little Ponies were great, and so was Barbie. I also tended to be very giggly and silly in a way that was associated with girls. This was the late 90s and early 2000s. I didn't have any reference to how I viewed myself deep down. My parents had always been taught to be open-minded and accepting of other folk, and I tried my best at this. But I couldn't seem to be accepting of myself. Hell, I couldn't even accept my own bisexuality, let alone understand that my gender was not as simple as girl. One part of myself that was considered acceptable as being genderless was my love of art and nature. So this was always something I clung hard to. I went to school and became a teacher, thus picking an industry that pushes its cis-het women educators to be motherly, feminine, and straight. Meeting my wife allowed me to fully accept my sexuality and the nerdy side of myself. Having our daughter taught me that my role as a parent was not defined by me simply having breasts. But I still felt at odds with myself. I had noticed that I had got to the point where I only felt comfortable outside of the house in dresses. Like, I only felt valuable and powerful as a teacher and a parent if I was hyper-feminine. This was not a bad thing per se. I did feel confident, swaggering down the halls in my quirky girl dresses. I was considered a tough but cool teacher by most of my students. It's amazing how on top of your game you can be. I was so sure about my future. I was so sure I knew myself. Until a neurological disorder forced me out of my career. I was bored and stuck at home and in the middle of an identity crisis. This led my wife to introducing me to Red Dead Redemption 2. And yes, it was amazing, obviously. The game had everything I wanted: nature, adventure, danger, mystery, beauty. But my experience living vicariously through Arthur and John had everything I needed. I adored them both and was especially fond of Arthur. How could I not? I spent hours and hours taking care of this digital cowboy, feeding him, bathing him, improving his relationship with his horse, the gang, and his world, keeping not just his body healthy, but also his soul, so to speak. I knew Arthur wasn't real, yet I would take the time to personalize his hair, beard, outfits, and gear for him. I spent way too much time adjusting the length and shape of his facial hair. I just assumed that I was treating him like a pet or something, until one day I was doing my typical thing of obsessively talking about Red Dead with my wife. I was telling her about how I had given Arthur the same mustache as Trelawney. She threatened to go into my game file and shave him bald if I kept talking about it. We laughed, as you do, and then, without knowing why I said it, I blurted it out. God, sometimes I wish I could just grow a mustache. I'd love to have a mustache, but only sometimes. And look like a dapper guy with a mustache. But then if I wanted to dress girly, I could just shave it off. We were silent for a moment, and then my wife laughed and said, Babe, that's the most envy thing I've ever heard. Do you think you might be non-binary? My wife's question sort of flipped a light switch. Realizing that I could dress any way I wanted, and actually doing so, has been insanely freeing. But also frustrating because of fear of judgment from others. But what I know now, I don't think I could ever go back and change. I jokingly blame Red Dead Redemption 2 for this. What I thought was a cowboy Tamagotchi turned out to be me expressing my need to connect with and live this masculine part of myself. So many things about me are finally making sense now. Turns out this has not been an uncommon way to feel about the game and self discovery. Why is it, in all my nearly 40 years of life, that a violent game about outlaws broke me out of my shell? Why has it been this way for so many others too? I spoke with several friends online, asking them questions about the topic of gender in the game. I've cut together their responses for the sake of time. I first spoke to Tony, whose pronouns are he, him. I also have returning guests Rhiannon, they, she, and Nicola, she, her. I will also be reading responses that were sent to me from Frank, whose pronouns are he, him. How do each of y'all define gender, personally define gender for yourselves?
To myself, it's more of a, I would say, expression rather than like a specific set. You look at how even cis people are, and there is no one specific way to be a man or to be a woman.
Yeah.
And it's just arbitrary to try and put it into these little boxes.
Yeah.
I mean, even from a biological standpoint, which sex and gender are different.
Yes.
But even from a biological sex standpoint, there's so many different variations. Like we're not manufactured goods. There's no standard. Personally, for myself, I wasn't really aware of trans in general until was it like 2016 when I actually met a friend. Ironically, I met them on OkCupid, but he showed me his ID. And normally when someone shows you your ID, you just go, oh, look at your stupid picture, because no one looks good in their pictures. And my other friend pointed out that it still said F, because back then there wasn't really a way to change that unless you went through like the legal stuff. It wasn't just in our state, you can do M, F, or X as long as you have a doctor sign it. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, so that's when, once I kind of learned what that was, it kind of clicked for me. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went from, being what I perceived as cis female dating men and it not feeling right to trying to date girls. And I was like, well, I mean, it's not as bad as how straight guys felt, but like I wasn't attracted.
Yeah.
So having to go through all of that, and then because it's weird, I knew what gender fluid was because of whatever corner of Tumblr I was on before that. And I remember in high school, we actually watched a video in sociology about a trans woman who went over to, I believe it was the Philippines, and got her surgery.
Yeah.
But it was never discussed in a sense of like, these are how, like, there are a group of people that identify like this. I just was like, it's their body. They can do whatever they want with it. Like, I don't care what you do as long as you're not harming anyone else. And I mean, I could see that it was bringing her joy. So, but it wasn't from my side either. Yeah. And it was just very much like, hey, but it wasn't ever discussed in the class that like, hey, some people are like this. I just thought it was like, like the guy that turned himself into the lizard man or the cat guy. Like, I thought it was just like, hey, you do you. Like, it's not hurting anyone.
So for me, I guess the way I see gender is just fluidity, in my opinion. Like, there's no right or wrong exactly. We're all just human beings at the end of the day. We're all just humans. And I see gender as like an expression of, it's just more of an expression of who you are as a human being. Like, what is your human spirit? And so I think, how you identify within that gender spectrum is just you expressing more of your own human spirit of what you bring to this world and what you bring to Mother Earth and what you what's the medicine that you're putting into your own self? What's the medicine that you're spreading to others? And so to me, I just see gender as something fluid and doesn't have, constructs. There isn't a right or wrong to it. And it's just you yourself growing more as a human being and growing more as within your own human spirit. I think Rainfall, like he says a quote in the game that resonates with me, and you're able to take it as you will with any kind of situation. But he says, we become more of what we already are.
I'm a cisgendered female, so I'm very cautious about the ground that I'm treading on. Especially regarding like gender identity. I know that's a very hot topic in a lot of places. But yes, I have no issue at all with however somebody wants to identify. It's if you identify as male, female, non-binary, I might not fully understand to certain degrees because I know there's numerous gender identities out there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim that I know every one of them or understand them because I don't. I would be ignorant to claim that I did know. But yeah, if you're a chill person and if you're not a complete butt, then just be yourself.
From Frank, I feel like gender is whatever an individual person makes it. Most of what we see and hear about gender is what society assigns to it. I feel like even as a transgender guy, I try to fit into those stereotypes because of societal pressure to fit into those norms. Gender is way too plagued with tradition and expectations to try and define it in a way that doesn't feel hollow. But for me personally, it's what an individual makes of it.
I think it's good to acknowledge that this is not something that you feel like you can talk a lot about in terms of being able to understand how other people feel. And I think that's what I've been seeing is that everyone's view of gender, who tend to have more an in-depth look about it, they all have a slightly different definition. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that goes back to the fluidity concept. And it's because I've heard some people saying that gender for them is what they culturally align themselves with groups of people with. Me personally, I feel like it's becoming, for me, I feel like I'm reverting back to the personality I had when I was about 10. And for me, that feels like my gender. It feels honest for me. And but I know that the definition for gender with my wife is something completely different. And so I think it's beautiful that everyone has so many different definitions, and that it is hard to put it into words, like you said, Rhiannon. It is very hard. I have a hard time explaining it because it's hard to explain to other people who don't understand why so many queer people are open-minded about the concept of gender with themselves or with other people. It's hard to explain because everyone's experience with this is different. How has Red Dead changed you as a person since you started playing the game?
I would personally say that it's made me sort of dive back into history. I've always really liked history. I enjoyed it because I like learning about how things, how they came to be. I mean, from everything from like linguistics to building structures and just how everything came to be.
So like me growing up and stuff, like it was really rough and I did not have like a good self-image about myself. And I always just kind of like, from the environment around me and just from the people that were around me, made me believe for the longest time that I'm just like the villain, that I'm just bad, that I'm not capable of being a good person, that I'm not a good person. And for a long time, I really truly believed that. And like when I went through such a hard breakup like last year and stuff, and having to like move back and move back in with family and stuff, it was like really hard because like I was at a very low point mentally. And so it was like a lot of that, like never feeling like I was a good person or never feeling like I was capable of being a good person. Or I always resonate with villains a lot of times because, like, well, not all villains, but like, I resonated with like a good bit of villains a lot of times because it made sense to me, like, why they wanted to become a villain because society in general pushed them out, or society told them like they're never good enough because they're different. And so
Yeah.
that's how I always felt growing up. I always felt like, and even like in my adulthood, I always felt like I'm just a bad person. I'm just a crappy person and might as well live into that. And if that's what people think of me, then I guess that's what I'll just be. I'll be the villain of the story. I don't care. During my like dark times and stuff, when I was playing Red Dead and just Arthur, and like for instance Charles, I resonate with him a lot too because I'm in reconnecting indigenous person and somebody who's like a mixed native, or mixed race native. And
yeah, with Arthur, there was just like never before had I like really connected with a character so heavily. And I remember distinctly it was because like there were even moments with where he was kind of like questioning himself, is he a good person? Like, is he actually good? He has everybody around him telling him he's good, and just like it was the moment specifically, like he'd help someone and they'd be like, you're a good man. He's like, no, I'm not. And it really reminded me of myself. Arthur made me feel so seen for the first time in a way I'd never felt before because it showed my internal struggle. Arthur's redemption like journey really inspired me to give myself that journey, to give myself redemption.
I think for me, I agree with Riri saying the whole like connecting with Arthur and his self-deprecation, because oh boy, do I wear self-deprecation as a t-shirt near enough every single day. The amount of times I have to try and catch myself.
Yeah.
At the same time, my brain is just like, no, no, just let that feeling go through, like that routine.
Yeah.
But I think just similar, yeah, similar vibes with that. Maybe not in the same context. Different life experiences in that. But just the game has kind of like helped me be a bit more open-minded, I would think, because the game has allowed me to socialize with more people. I'm a bit of a lone wolf. I like to think myself a bit of a lone wolf. I keep my
Charles.
I keep my friend groups very minimal. It's manageable that way. It sounds a bit odd to say like that, but
I get it.
I tend to keep myself to myself. I like my own company. Anything too much, it's just like, no, thank you. So yeah, I would be a bit like Charles. Just like vibing to myself and somebody maybe just trying to talk to me. Then again, I think I could be that person as well. I think I could be Uncle in that scenario without realizing. Or I could be like Charles. It's a bit of a switch. It's a weird one. But yeah, like just growing up, I was always told go out and make friends. Easier said than done when you're a chronically shy person. But yeah, just speaking to more people, yourselves included, is making me feel a bit more adult, to say the least.
From Frank. Red Dead Redemption 2, its fans, its cast, all of it, has definitely made me more comfortable with aspects of myself that I wasn't before. I'm more comfortable with sharing my interests than I was before without fear of people thinking I'm odd for it. My posting of weird art, for example. The community for Red Dead Redemption 2 has made me more open with my mental health struggles, too.
How do each of you interpret Arthur's line about viewing men and women being the same?
Oh, he's bi. That was my take on it.
Yeah.
You've definitely had a fumble about with both. Let's be real.
he thinks everybody should be equal, and he does seem to like show that he believes everybody should be equal. And that, I mean, he's seen plenty of women as outlaws do all kinds of crazy things, and so he has no room to doubt that a woman can be just as powerful as a man, if not even more. So
I have two. Obviously, I'm biased due to my ships. So right there, from a straight, ship bias, I'm like, hell yeah, buy Canon Arthur. But from a more analytical standpoint, I would say that it's almost analyzing love for more than what I would probably say the whole world, but especially America, because we're the problem child. Very much puts love in a sense of like it's only for your partner, it's only for your wife or your husband. And it's like you look at so many other languages and they have so many different words for love. We have one. And it's very much like, I guess one of my favorite quotes is if people don't think you and your best friend are gay, you're not best friends. And it's almost like, why do other people get to judge whether you are dating an individual just based upon how close you are to them? Like,
yeah,
you can be close to tons of different people and love them. It doesn't mean you have to have sex with them or get married or move in together. Like, you can do whatever you want. And I think that's him saying that regardless of, sexual attraction, it's anyone can love anyone regardless of what type of person they are.
From Frank. If I'm remembering it correctly, I feel like for the time, it's pretty modern thinking.
I start thinking too about, he views, men and women being the same, which means he doesn't view himself too differently than those three women sitting on the ground arguing and washing clothes. Like he feels he's got a connection to them. And that's not to say that any other man in the camp, in the gang, would agree with that. They may not. They may say, well, yeah, we're equal, but I'm still different from you. But Arthur doesn't, for me, it feels like Arthur in his head is not seeing himself differently in that way, which really does play into that concept of what gender is. It's different for everyone. And if he's not seeing, if it's just an outward appearance, but if it's based on internally what we are, I feel like Arthur making that statement is very much in that line of his perception. He doesn't have words for the gender terms and everything, but just his perception of himself in that sense. How would you say your experience with the game has helped you to better understand yourself in terms of gender?
I would say I learned that it's okay to be more masculine women. And by masculine, like in a cisgender term, is what would be considered like a tomboy.
Yeah.
Butch is what some people would say as well. I was called that in high school. But yeah, just seeing like primarily, obviously, Sadie and Grimshaw and even Black Belle, are like they're very handy women. Like you would not mess with these women. I mean, I'm fairly much a pacifist. I'm nothing like these women. These women would terrify me if I ever encountered them. Especially Grimshaw. Grimshaw, I both admire and am terrified by. Women in Red Dead are not one-dimensional at all. They're multifaceted, they're nuanced, they're flawed, which is the main thing. And, these women have, pros and cons to their personality. They're like loyal, they could be funny, they could be badass, but at the same time, they could be bossy, they could be irritating, and just
they can be grieving.
Yeah. And it's and they're various ages as well. You've got younger women and you've got older women. And again, back to Grimshaw. Grimshaw is an older middle-aged woman. How often do you see middle-aged women being portrayed in that sort of way in the media, because I think it's quite cruel that once you reach a certain age, you're lumped into a specific character category.
Her actor, it's Callie, right? You pronounce it Callie. I always want to say Carly. But she said it best at Tombstone. When they had like the panel, she said it best. She was like, she's being given a space to where she's allowed to be like a middle-aged woman who's being aggressive and angry and stuff. And it's like, she said it best. She said, how dare she be aggressive? How dare she be grouchy? Yeah.
And I want to touch on that because I'm so glad you brought that, because I did watch the video from that, and I love that conversation was brought up by someone saying that the game allowed them to understand themselves better, and they didn't say in terms of sexuality or gender, but you could tell that that's what they were alluding to, and that I think it's brilliant that we are taking these character stories that don't even necessarily have to do with directly to do with gender or sexuality, but we are taking them and we are connected with them and interpreting them in a way that helps us to be more comfortable with ourselves in that sense. And I do love her response, because that was such a good response. It's like, because you don't think about that, that she's not allowed to play these certain characters a certain way, that she gets to play this in a more authentic way to her. And I love that. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. I guess like for me answering the question, it's the game's taught me a lot of, there is no like one definition of gender out there. Like everybody will always have their own definition. But when it comes to gender, its topic in general, there is no one definition for it, and that is perfectly okay, because I think that's the definition in itself, is there is no definition. It's what you make it. Whatever you define it is what you make of it.
I guess it's more of, it helped me almost deconstruct the because toxic masculinity even reaches into trans men. And because there's a certain way and you want to be perceived a certain way, and since I grew up with the more redneck country style living, but getting into the more queer spaces, I kind of just abandoned that part of me because of the association. Playing Red Dead has really allowed me to be like, no, I can still have that Western aesthetic. I can still have that country aesthetic. And if people perceive me that way, I can't control that. I can't control how anyone perceives me, but I can do certain things to, make it more visible that I am safe.
From Frank. I feel less inclined to fit into stereotypes as playing the game and finding the community. I was very much, I have to look a certain way, speak a certain way, and be a certain way to pass or be male.
Which character or moment in the game resonated the most with in understanding yourself in terms of gender?
I think just like general badass moments for these characters. Maybe not necessarily anything that resonates with me, but I know for some people it would also resonate. Obviously when Sadie switches out from the female garb into the masculine garb, to Grimshaw going full ramble on the Foreman brothers.
I think for me, so like me as somebody who is a little bit of aspiring drag queen, I don't want to exactly like say like baby drag queen, because I'm more aspiring right now because I don't have enough time to put more effort into it. But seeing what is the character's name? Margaret. Seeing Margaret reminds me a lot of like the drag scene and drag culture, and I've seen like a lot of people say like she could be kind of a like semblance, or not semblance, but like she could kind of be like a little defining factors, like maybe a trans person and stuff.
Yeah.
The way I see her is as someone who is someone who does do drag and stuff like that. Another one is Mr. Black and Mr. White. And, you know, they have their own little like struggles and stuff like that, but seeing them, like when Arthur finds them in the treehouse and they're like kind of arguing like a married couple, it just,
I love those interactions.
I love it so much. And you know, like even Arthur, when he meets him for the first time, it very much the script alludes to, like he says, you know, people don't like seeing men together and stuff like that. Like he knows about that kind of thing. And it kind of alludes to Arthur maybe has had experience with that personally himself.
Yeah.
So that really resonates with me a lot, because it's like, you know, throughout history and stuff, people want to say like, oh, it's a new thing to be gay, or it's a new thing for, you know, our community just coming out of the woodworks out of nowhere and stuff, when we've always been here. And Mr. Black and Mr. White, they may have started off on a really bad sense of footing, but in the end of it, it's like, it seems like they've discovered what kind of life they want to be in, and like they feel a little bit more free within their life and stuff, that they're together, and maybe they're a couple, maybe they're not, but it's heavily alluded that they are possibly a couple. I mean, just listen to how they fight. Yeah. It's just how an old couple argues. That's a really big defining moment for me. Grimshaw, I know it's gonna sound funny, but she for me is like, to me was like such a gender defining moment for me. Like I found so much of my own gender explanation through her, because I've always been the mama bear. I'm the oldest sibling. I've always taken care of my siblings and my family, and I take care of people. I've like helped raise people's kids and stuff like that. And so I'm like a fierce mama bear, very much no nonsense. I'm not going to take it for nothing. And I really mean it when I've said, like, I've done things in my past that I'm not very much proud of, but like, you know, I can be pretty stone cold when I need to be. That part of my past will come out sometimes, but I weaponize it for good. But it's like my own gender explanation was kind of through her a little bit, because it's like she holds that very much, you know, she's very feminine, and she keeps herself like, you know, she makes herself look good, and she does look good. I mean, did you see her in that black dress? Come on, her titties are on point.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Titties on point, I'm telling you. And so she's, you know, she's proud, and she is loud. She is large and in charge, but she does have a softness about herself. And I have no other way to explain it, but it's like, I just find my own self within her. And it's like, when I think of my gender, sometimes I just see myself as Grimshaw and stuff. And I love, you know, and I love Sadie and her excellent, and, you know, her expression of that. And like a lot of people find themselves like, you know, looking to her when their own gender expression, like really relating to that. But with Grimshaw, is like, I really resonate with her, because it's like, she's just herself.
Yeah. So I do really enjoy some of like the side characters. I forget his name, but the circus guy.
Margaret.
Yeah. God damn it, Daddy, you were right. Like that's like one of my favorite quotes. But like, as you can see, Arthur doesn't question how the man is dressed, how the man is acting. He's just kind of like, yeah, like you need help. Okay. Like he's just kind of like, wow, this is a character. This is unique. This is different. But he doesn't judge the man based upon, you know, however he's acting or dressing. And I really like them showing characters like that. And a lot of the women that you meet that are just like, yeah, my husband's worthless and now I gotta work, and like, you know, almost like girl boss, like, you know, all these things that normal people who don't actually do any studying of history assume that like, no, women were always weak and frail and had to be in the kitchen. And like, and I mean, Sadie's a great example of that. And just, I mean, even the girls in the gang, I will say Mary Beth's probably the closest to a stereotypical what people think women were like. I will say that. But I mean, even her, she has her own depth. She's very critically thinking, which I guess back then would also be something that people view as like, that's, women didn't do that. They were just,
Yeah.
they were chore machines and baby makers. Like, yeah, so it's really cool to see all the varieties of it. And
Yeah.
um I mean, even Karen, seeing her struggling with the alcoholism,
Mhm.
because it's always portrayed as males, even in more modern media. It's always portrayed as men having those issues, and it's just like everybody can have these issues, no matter what your gender or your role and what you do.
My wife accuses me of becoming, jokingly accusing me of becoming, of realizing that I'm non-binary because of my silly little cowboy game. And because it's like I would realize that I was expressing a lot of what I really wanted to do with myself through Arthur. And I realized, like, am I really in the middle? Um I I've been watching and reading all this stuff, about identifying queerness in history. And there are, and I'm paraphrasing YouTuber Kaz Rao on this, but there are two ways to look for gender. I mean, in queerness in general, throughout our history, and it's one is looking for how it really existed during the time, reading through those letters that have been, coming up, learning that there were people who were assigned male at birth but lived as women, or vice versa. Identifying and not trying to cover it up that they weren't actually roommates. That's one way. And the other way we identify queerness is how we connect with it now in the present. And these expressions of, the difference between men and women, that, some are worth living and fighting and dying for. So much of this is how we can connect to it, and that's fine. How we connect with these things is legitimate. It's important, even if those things looked, going back in time and seeing these things in real time in the 1800s, even if the people that were doing these things wouldn't now identify a certain way, it's still important for us to make that connection with ourselves. It's like when I interviewed Matt, he said him and Roger never intended to play that part as people who were attracted to each other, but the fact that we connected with it in that way is a beautiful thing, and it shows that those things are valid.
Red Dead Redemption 2 is a story of many themes, and self-discovery and acceptance is part of that. Despite 36 years of being the gang's brutal muscle, Arthur learns to embrace his true nature, one that he denied and forced down until his whole world began to burn. Even if you play low on her, Arthur's true nature battles our own decisions for him.
It's done. I don't see no way out of any of this.
What about loyalty?
That's long been broken.
But what are you gonna do?
Gotta see this through. Try and make some of it right. There was a code we had. Gotta still mean something.
This theme of self-discovery and acceptance is so easy to connect to queerness. Whether it's our sexuality or gender, we understand Arthur's need to be his true self, despite what the gang expects of him, despite what society assumes. In the case of gender, so much about Arthur and his world challenges stereotypes and expectations from the 19th century that are still relevant today. People are discovering and accepting what gender is to them, understanding that it changes the direction of our lives forever. We understand the need to realize the best version of ourselves. The process can be painful. We face dangers from society and even the scarring loss of family and friends who feel that we have betrayed them. How easy it is to see our stories reflected in Arthur Morgan. And as poignant as this connection is, we can find comfort in knowing that, like Arthur helping others, accepting our true nature can positively impact those who struggle to understand themselves as well. In the next episode, I'll be diving into Red Dead's sexy world of fan art and fan fiction. Oh Lord, here comes the ships. Until then, as always, outlaws for life, and be gay, do crimes.